tried to fight back. When something kills 1/3 of your world, you respond. You respond with everything you have, everything you believe, everything you fear. You respond in ways that are rational and ways that are insane. You respond with prayer and with violence, with medicine and with superstition, with extraordinary generosity and with extraordinary cruelty. Medieval Europe's response to the Black Death was all of these things at once. The first response was religious. For the deeply devout medieval world, and virtually everyone was deeply devout, the only framework large enough to contain a catastrophe of this scale was God. The plague, it was widely believed, was divine punishment. Punishment for the sins of humanity. Punishment for greed, for lust, for the corruption of the church, for the general moral failure of Christian civilization. If the plague was God's punishment, then the response was repentance. Across Europe, flagellant movements erupted. Groups of men, sometimes hundreds strong, who traveled from town to town, publicly, whipping themselves with leather straps studded with metal spikes. They marched in processions, chanting and bleeding, publicly enacting penance for the sins they believed had brought the wrath of God upon the world. The flagellants were not fringe figures. They were ordinary people, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, driven to extremity by extremity. In some towns they were welcomed as holy men. In others they were feared as fanatics. Pope Clement VI eventually condemned the flagellant movement and ordered it suppressed. The flagellants pointed out that the Pope was still alive while 1/3 of Europe was dead. The second response was to find someone to blame. This is one of the oldest and most terrible patterns in human history. When catastrophe strikes, when the cause is invisible and the suffering is unbearable, the mind searches for a human agent. A person, a group, someone who can be held responsible, someone whose punishment might end the suffering. In 1348 and 1349, across Germany, France, Switzerland, and other parts of Europe, Jewish communities became the target of this search for blame. The accusation was that Jewish people had poisoned the wells, that they had deliberately introduced the plague into Christian communities. There was not a shred of evidence for this. The plague was killing Jewish people at the same rate as everyone else. But evidence was not what was being sought. In Strasbourg in 1349, approximately 2,000 Jewish men, women, and children were burned alive on a wooden platform in the Jewish cemetery, before the plague had even reached the city. In Basel, in Mainz, in Cologne, in hundreds of smaller towns across Central Europe, Jewish communities were massacred, expelled, or forced to flee. Pope Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls condemning the violence and pointing out, correctly, that Jewish people were dying from the plague like everyone else. He offered papal protection to Jewish communities. In most places, it made little difference. The third response, and the one that would have the most lasting consequences, was practical. Venice, in 1377, instituted the first formal quarantine system in recorded history. Ships arriving from infected ports were required to anchor offshore for 30 days, later extended to 40 days, which gave us the word quarantine from the Italian quarantina, meaning 40 days. This was not based on any understanding of germ theory. It was based on observation. Someone noticed that people who had been isolated for a period of time did not seem to transmit the disease. The mechanism was mysterious, but the pattern was real. The quarantine system worked imperfectly, but it worked, and it became the foundation of all future epidemic control measures, including the measures used during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. 650 years later, the same basic insight: separate the sick from the healthy. Wait. Cities began appointing public health officers, magistrates specifically responsible for monitoring disease and enforcing isolation measures. Hospitals were built, not just for the wealthy, but as public institutions. The first glimmers of what we would call public health infrastructure began to emerge from the wreckage of the plague years. The plague also, paradoxically, accelerated the development of medicine. Not because medieval doctors understood what was killing people, but because their failure was so total and so visible that it became impossible to continue as before. When your entire medical framework fails to prevent 1/3 of your world from dying, you are forced, eventually, to question the framework. It would take centuries for that questioning to produce germ theories, vaccines, antibiotics. But the process of questioning, the habit of empirical observation, replacing received authority, began in the laboratories and sick rooms of the plague years. Out of failure, the seed of something new. It is one of the most painful and most human patterns in history. We learn best when everything else has stopped working. Follow Scar's Time Full Series on my bio.